The morning fog hung low between the tall pines as Alex made his way deeper into Willow Creek Forest. He adjusted the camera strap digging into his shoulder and checked his map once more. 2 hikers at the local diner had mentioned seeing something big and metal about 3 miles past the North Trail marker. Alex wasn't supposed to be this far in. Technically, this section was closed until spring, but his photography blog needed something special. At 32, Alex had grown tired of his accounting job. His weekend hobby of photographing abandoned places had slowly gathered a following online. Old factories, forgotten houses, empty amusement parks. There was something about places where time had stopped that called to him. Each location told a story and his followers kept asking for more. Just a bit further, he mumbled to himself, pushing aside a branch that hung across the barely visible trail. His boots sank slightly into the damp earth as he walked. The only sounds were his breathing, birds calling overhead, and the occasional snap of twigs beneath his feet. 3 hours into his hike, Alex was about to give up. The sun had risen higher, burning away the morning fog, and the metal object, whatever it was, seemed to be just another local legend. He sat on a fallen tree trunk and pulled out his water bottle. As he tilted his head back to drink, something caught his eye through the trees. A glint of something unnatural. "No way," he whispered, standing up quickly. Alex moved toward what he'd seen, pushing through a thick patch of undergrowth. The forest floor sloped downward, forming a small ravine that wasn't visible from the trail. And there it was. Nestled between trees that had grown around it over the years sat the unmistakable shape of an airplane. Not a large commercial jet, but a smaller passenger plane, the kind that might hold 20 people. Its once white exterior was now a patchwork of moss, rust, and faded paint. The forest had worked hard to reclaim it, with vines snaking through broken windows and small saplings growing through cracks in the fuselage. "This is incredible," Alex whispered, his heart racing as he raised his camera. The plane seemed to have crash-landed decades ago, yet somehow remained largely intact. The wings had been damaged, one was crumpled against a large oak tree, but the main body of the aircraft wasn't crushed. It rested at an angle, the nose slightly buried in the soft earth while the tail section was propped up against a rocky outcrop. Alex circled the plane slowly, taking photos from every angle. His mind raced with questions. How had a plane crashed here without making headlines? Where were the passengers? Had someone already come to rescue them? If so, why leave the aircraft behind? He checked his phone. No signal as expected this deep in the woods. He'd have to wait to search for information about the crash online. For now, all he had were his observations and his camera. The side door of the plane was partially open, hanging at an odd angle from its hinges. Alex approached cautiously, aware that the structure might not be stable after years of exposure to the elements. He shone his flashlight inside, revealing rows of seats still bolted to the floor, though many were now covered in leaves and dirt that had blown in through broken windows. "Hello?" he called out, more from habit than any expectation of a response. His voice echoed slightly in the hollow cabin. The rational part of his brain knew this was potentially dangerous. The plane could be structurally unsound. There could be wild animals living inside, or the sharp, rusted metal could cause serious injury. But the curious part of his brain, the part that had led him to explore abandoned places for years, was already calculating how to get inside safely. Tomorrow, he decided aloud. It was already mid-afternoon and he wanted to return with proper equipment, better lights, gloves, perhaps a first aid kit. Maybe even a metal detector. Who knew what might still be inside? As Alex turned to leave, his flashlight beam caught something that made him freeze. In the cockpit area, partially visible through the open door separating it from the main cabin, was what looked like a seat, with something strapped to it. From this distance and angle, he couldn't make out details, but it was clearly not part of the original aircraft. A shiver ran down his spine despite the warm spring air. Whatever was in there had been deliberately secured. Whether by the pilot or someone who had found the plane after the crash, he couldn't tell. Alex took a few more photos, carefully marking the location on his GPS device. As he began the long hike back, his mind filled with possibilities. The plane itself was an amazing find for his blog, but what might be inside could be even more significant. Government secrets? Valuable cargo? Evidence of what had happened? The forest grew darker as clouds rolled in, and Alex picked up his pace. The thought of being caught in a rainstorm miles from his truck didn't appeal to him. Yet his mind kept returning to the plane, sitting silently in its green grave, waiting for decades with its secrets. That night, in his small apartment above the town bookstore, Alex searched online for any record of a plane crash in Willow Creek Forest. Nothing came up. He expanded his search to include the entire state over the past 50 years. There were crashes recorded, but none in that location, and none involving that type of aircraft that remained unrecovered. He uploaded his photos to his computer, enhancing and studying them for clues. The plane's registration numbers were barely visible beneath years of grime and growth, but he could make out part of the sequence. Not enough for a definitive identification, but something to start with. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Alex tossed and turned, his dreams filled with images of the plane. In one dream, he opened the cockpit door to find not the pilot's seat, but an endless corridor stretching impossibly into darkness. In another, he heard muffled voices coming from inside the sealed cabin, though he knew that couldn't be real. By morning, he had a plan. He would return better equipped, document everything thoroughly, and then decide whether to contact authorities. Part of him, the part that had grown his online following, wanted to keep this discovery to himself, at least temporarily. Another part recognized that if there was something significant inside, he might be out of his depth. Alex packed his backpack methodically. Extra batteries for his flashlight, a more powerful camera lens, work gloves, a small crowbar in case he needed to force open a stuck compartment, water, energy bars, and a first aid kit. He hesitated before adding the metal detector he'd bought years ago for beach exploration, but rarely used. It might come in handy. The drive to the trailhead took 40 minutes from town. Few cars were in the small gravel lot when he arrived. Just a couple of hikers heading for the marked trails. Alex nodded politely as he passed them, then waited until they were out of sight before slipping into the restricted section of the forest. The hike seemed quicker this time, his pace fueled by anticipation rather than uncertain hope. The forest felt different in the morning light, less mysterious, more alive with birdsong and the rustle of small animals. Yet as he approached the ravine where the plane rested, an unusual silence fell, as if the forest itself was holding its breath around the unnatural object in its midst. The plane looked just as he remembered, perhaps even more striking in the clear morning light. Alex set down his backpack and took several deep breaths. This was more than just another blog post. Something about this place, this discovery, felt important in a way his previous explorations hadn't. As he approached the partially open door of the aircraft, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that once he stepped inside, his life would change in ways he couldn't predict. The metal hull creaked slightly in the gentle breeze, almost like an invitation or a warning. Whatever waited inside that abandoned plane in the heart of the forest, Alex knew he had to find out. He clicked on his flashlight, pulled on his gloves, and prepared to step into the unknown. Alex took a deep breath and pulled himself up into the airplane. The metal floor groaned under his weight, and he paused, listening for any signs that the structure might give way. When nothing happened, he shone his flashlight around the cabin. Time had frozen here. Dust particles danced in the beam of light, disturbed for the first time in what must have been decades. The seats, once cream-colored, had faded to a dirty beige. Some still had seatbelts neatly fastened as if waiting for passengers who would never return. "Hello?" Alex called out again, though he knew it was pointless. His voice sounded different inside the metal tube, hollow and somehow smaller than in the open forest. Carefully, he made his way down the narrow aisle. His boots crunched on broken glass and dead leaves that had blown in through the shattered windows. The air smelled of damp earth, rusted metal, and something else he couldn't quite identify, a stale, closed-in scent that made him wrinkle his nose. Alex paused to take photos, capturing the eerie stillness of the abandoned aircraft. The overhead compartments hung open, some still containing what looked like bags and personal items. He reached up and carefully pulled down what had once been a carry-on suitcase. The zipper was rusted shut, but the fabric had rotted enough that it tore easily under his gloved hands. Inside were clothes, men's shirts and pants, now deteriorated and home to several generations of forest insects. A plastic toiletry bag contained the remnants of a toothbrush, razor, and a bottle of aftershave that had long since evaporated. In a side pocket, he found a wallet. "This feels wrong," Alex muttered to himself, but curiosity won out. The leather was cracked and stiff, but he could still make out a driver's license inside. The photo showed a middle-aged man with glasses and a serious expression. The name read Thomas Reynolds with an address in a city about 300 miles away. The license had expired in 1992. Alex carefully placed the wallet in his backpack. If he decided to report his find, the authorities might want it. Or perhaps he could track down Thomas's family and return this small piece of their lost relative. Moving forward, Alex found more personal items scattered throughout the cabin. A paperback novel with pages stuck together from moisture, a woman's compact mirror, a child's stuffed animal now serving as home to a family of mice who scattered as his light hit them. Where did they all go? He wondered aloud. There were no signs of bodies, which suggested a rescue had occurred. But why leave all these personal belongings behind? And why hadn't the plane been removed or at least documented? As he approached the cockpit door, Alex felt his heart rate quicken. This was what he had come back for, the mysterious object he'd glimpsed from outside. The door was jammed, not fully closed, but not open enough to slip through. He set down his backpack and retrieved the small crowbar. Easy does it, he muttered, working the metal tool into the gap. With a groan of protest, the door shifted slightly, then suddenly gave way. Alex stumbled forward, catching himself on the back of the pilot's seat. And there it was. Secured to the pilot's chair with what looked like climbing rope was a metal case. Not a standard briefcase, but something far more substantial. More like a small safe with a digital keypad lock. Despite years in the elements, the case appeared remarkably well preserved, its surface only slightly tarnished. "What were you carrying, my friend?" Alex whispered, directing his question to the absent pilot. The cockpit itself told its own story. The control panel was surprisingly intact, dials and switches frozen in time. The pilot's headset still hung on a hook beside the seat. There was no obvious damage to suggest what had caused the crash. No shattered windshield, no crushed instruments. It was as if the pilot had simply landed the plane here, secured the case, and walked away. Alex took dozens of photos from every angle before attempting to touch anything. His blog followers would go crazy for this. It was the find of a lifetime. But more than that, it was a genuine mystery, one that stirred something deep in his curiosity. After documenting everything, he turned his attention back to the case. The rope securing it was weathered but still held firm. Alex used his pocket knife to carefully cut through the fibers one by one until the case was free. It was heavier than he expected, requiring both hands to lift. There was no manufacturer's name or any identifying marks on the exterior, just the keypad lock with numbers 0 through 9. A small red light on the side was unlit, suggesting the battery had died long ago. No way to open it here, Alex decided. He'd need tools he didn't have with him in the forest. He slipped the case into his backpack, surprised by how perfectly it fit, as if he'd brought exactly the right size bag for this purpose, a coincidence that felt almost like fate. Before leaving, Alex did one final sweep of the aircraft. In the very back, he found what appeared to be a cargo hold. Most of it was empty, save for a few wooden crates that had partially rotted away. Inside one, he discovered old electronic equipment, now useless and unidentifiable after years of exposure to the elements. The last crate, however, contained something odd, dozens of empty glass vials packed in rotted foam. Each was labeled with a serial number, but nothing to indicate what they might have contained. Alex photographed these as well, then carefully replaced everything as he'd found it. As he prepared to leave, a glint of metal caught his eye. Beneath the pilot's seat, partially hidden by a torn floor mat, was a small key. It didn't look like it would fit the case, it was too small, more like a locker key, but Alex pocketed it anyway. The light outside had shifted as he'd explored, the sun now casting long shadows through the trees. He'd spent nearly 3 hours inside the plane without realizing it. With the case secure in his backpack, Alex made his way back through the cabin and climbed down to the forest floor. The hike back felt different. Every snapping twig made him jump, and twice he stopped, convinced he heard footsteps behind him. But each time he turned, there was nothing but the silent forest. "You're freaking yourself out," he said aloud, but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Back at his truck, Alex carefully placed his backpack on the passenger seat. The weight of the case inside seemed to grow heavier. With each mile he drove back toward town, as if its importance was increasing the further it got from its forest prison. In his apartment that evening, Alex laid out his findings on the kitchen table. The wallet belonging to Thomas Reynolds, the small key from under the pilot's seat, and the case, mysterious, sealed, and somehow ominous in the warm light of his apartment. He spent hours online, searching for any information about Thomas Reynolds, about missing planes, about anything that might connect to his discovery. There were a few mentions of a Thomas Reynolds who had worked for a pharmaceutical company in the early 1990s, but nothing concrete to tie him to the plane. The case sat on his table, seemingly watching him. Alex tried various tools to open it, screwdrivers, pliers, even a hammer applied gently to the hinges, but it remained stubbornly sealed. The digital lock, as he'd suspected, was long dead, offering no hope of entering a code even if he knew it. Around midnight, exhausted but too wired to sleep, Alex remembered something. He dug through his desk drawer until he found a business card given to him months ago at a photography exhibition. The card belonged to an old locksmith who had admired Alex's photos of abandoned buildings and mentioned he had stories to tell about places everyone else had forgotten. Perfect, Alex murmured, tucking the card into his wallet for tomorrow. He made one final attempt to open the case before bed, running his fingers along every edge, looking for any weakness. As he turned it over, he noticed something he'd missed before, a small engraving on the bottom corner. The letters were tiny, almost invisible unless caught in the right light. P-R-O-J-E-C, T-A-U-R-O-R-A. Alex quickly wrote this down, then searched online. Nothing relevant came up, just mentions of the Northern Lights and a few companies with Aurora in their names. As he finally crawled into bed, the case secure in his closet behind a stack of photography equipment, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stumbled onto something significant. Not just an interesting story for his blog, but something that mattered in a larger way. Outside his window, a car drove slowly past, then stopped. Headlights remained on for a long moment before the vehicle moved on. Probably nothing, Alex told himself as he drifted off to sleep. Just a coincidence, but in the morning, he would discover that coincidences were becoming increasingly rare in his life, and that the contents of the mysterious case would change everything. Morning came with an uneasy feeling that clung to Alex like a shadow. He'd slept poorly, dreams filled with images of the plane and the mysterious case. Twice he'd awakened convinced someone was in his apartment, only to find nothing but darkness and the soft hum of his refrigerator. Over coffee, he stared at the case now sitting on his kitchen table. In the morning light, it looked less ominous, just a weathered metal box with a dead electronic lock. Yet something about it felt important, like it contained answers to questions he hadn't even thought to ask yet. The locksmith's shop opened at 10. Alex spent the intervening hours researching Project Aurora again, this time digging deeper than simple search results. He found obscure references in declassified government documents to various projects with code names, but nothing specific about Aurora. On a forum dedicated to government conspiracies, someone mentioned Aurora as a rumored biological research program from the early 1990s, but provided no evidence. This is probably nothing, Alex told himself, closing his laptop. Just some company files or old records, but if that were true, why secure it so carefully? Why the heavy-duty case with an electronic lock, tied to the pilot's seat as if it were precious cargo? The locksmith shop was tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop on a quiet side street. A bell jingled as Alex pushed open the door, the case heavy in his backpack. The interior smelled of metal filings and machine oil. Hundreds of keys hung on hooks behind the counter, and glass cases displayed antique locks and security devices. The man who emerged from the back room was older than Alex had expected, well into his 70s, with thick glasses and hands marked by decades of detailed work. His name tag read simply, "Frank. Help you?" Frank asked, eyeing Alex with mild curiosity. "I hope so. We met at the Westridge Gallery photography exhibition a few months back. You said you liked my photos of abandoned places." Recognition flickered in Frank's eyes, the young man with the factory pictures. "I remember now." He leaned on the counter. "What can I do for you?" Alex glanced around, confirming they were alone in the shop, then carefully removed the case from his backpack. "I need to get this open if possible. The electronic lock is dead." Frank studied the case without touching it, his expression giving nothing away. "Interesting piece. Military grade, if I'm not mistaken. Where'd you find it?" "That's a long story." Frank nodded slowly. Those usually are the best kind. He reached for the case. May I? Alex hesitated, then pushed it across the counter. Frank turned it over in his hands, examining every edge and corner with expert eyes. When he saw the tiny engraving on the bottom, he paused, adjusting his glasses for a closer look. Project Aurora, he read aloud. His eyes flicked up to meet Alex's. You know what this is? No idea. I was hoping you might. Frank set the case down carefully. There are stories, rumors mostly. Nothing I can verify. He tapped the case with one finger. But this is real enough. Can you open it? The old man considered for a long moment. Yes, but the question is, should I? Before Alex could respond, Frank continued. Whatever's in here, someone went to great lengths to protect it. And to hide it, I'm guessing. Alex leaned forward. I found it in a crashed plane in Willow Creek Forest. A plane that doesn't seem to exist in any official records. It was tied to the pilot's seat. Frank's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, or perhaps concern. Give me an hour, he said finally. Come back then, and bring cash. This isn't going on the books. The hour crawled by as Alex wandered through nearby shops, too distracted to focus on anything. When he returned to the locksmith's, the closed sign hung in the window, but the door opened when he tried it. Frank was waiting, the case now sitting open on his workbench in the back room. Wasn't as difficult as I expected, he said. These electronic locks, when the battery dies, there's usually a manual override. Just need to know where to look. Alex approached slowly, almost afraid to see what was inside. The case contained several items, each in its own foam cutout. A thick folder of documents, a small metal canister sealed with what looked like wax, a portable hard drive that appeared surprisingly modern compared to the age of the plane, and a handwritten journal bound in worn leather. I didn't look at any of it, Frank said. Not my business, but he hesitated. Be careful, young man. Some secrets stay buried for good reasons. Alex paid him, double what he'd asked for, and carefully repacked the case. As he turned to leave, Frank called after him. Those rumors I mentioned? About Project Aurora? The old man's face was grave. They said it was about changing people, making them into something else, something not quite human anymore. The walk back to his apartment seemed to take forever, the weight of the case now more psychological than physical. Inside, Alex locked his door, drew the blinds, and spread the contents on his table. He started with the journal, its pages filled with cramped handwriting that became increasingly erratic as it progressed. The writer, who identified himself only as Dr. L, described working for a government program focused on human enhancement through biological means. The early entries were clinical, detailing laboratory procedures and test results, but as the journal continued, the tone changed. Test subject 27 exhibited unexpected side effects, one entry read. Heightened aggression, followed by periods of catatonia. The serum is progressing too rapidly through his system. We've moved him to isolation. Later entries became more disturbing. They're pushing us to move to human trials too quickly. The animal tests show promising results in terms of enhanced strength and cognitive function, but the psychological deterioration is severe. I've expressed my concerns, but orders come from too high up to question. The final pages were barely legible, written in a shaking hand. I can't be part of this anymore. What we've created is too dangerous. The subjects, they're still people no matter what management says. I've made copies of everything. The world needs to know what happened here. What we did. God forgive me for not speaking up sooner. Alex set the journal aside, his hands trembling slightly. The folder contained technical documents, most filled with scientific terminology he couldn't understand. There were photos, too. Clinical images of laboratory subjects, their faces blurred but their bodies showing strange physical changes. Muscle growth beyond normal human capacity, skin with an odd, almost metallic sheen. The small canister was sealed tight with warning labels clearly indicating biohazardous material. Alex left it untouched. The hard drive presented another challenge. It would need to be connected to a computer, but doing so might alert someone if it contained tracking software. Alex decided to leave it for now. As evening fell, he sat surrounded by the evidence of something terrible. Not just a crashed plane, but a deliberate attempt to expose what appeared to be illegal human experimentation. The pilot, perhaps Dr. L himself, had tried to bring this information to the public but never made it. And now, decades later, the truth had literally fallen into Alex's hands. He was so absorbed in the documents that he almost missed the sound. a car engine shutting off directly outside his building. Footsteps on the stairs. Then, a knock at his door. Alex froze, staring at the scattered papers and photos covering his table. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Mr. Parker, we know you're in there." A woman's voice, professional and calm. "We need to talk about what you found in Willow Creek Forest." His heart pounding, Alex quickly gathered everything back into the case. How had they found him? Who were they? The knock came a third time. "Mr. Parker, this doesn't have to be difficult. We're simply retrieving government property. You've done nothing wrong yet." Through the peephole, Alex could see a woman in a dark suit, flanked by two men with similar expressionless faces. They didn't look like local police. They didn't look like people who would simply go away if ignored. With the case clutched to his chest, Alex moved quickly to his bedroom window, the fire escape. His only chance now was to disappear, to find someone who could help him understand what he'd found and, more importantly, what to do with it. As he slipped out onto the metal landing, he heard the sound of his front door being forced open. They were inside his apartment now. There was no going back. The metal stairs of the fire escape rattled beneath Alex's feet as he descended, the case clutched tightly against his chest. Above him, he heard voices in his apartment, calm, professional voices that somehow scared him more than angry shouts would have. These people were methodical. They knew exactly what they were doing. Rain had started to fall, a light drizzle that made the metal rungs slippery. Alex nearly lost his footing on the last section of ladder, but managed to drop safely to the alley below. He pressed himself against the brick wall, heart hammering in his chest, and listened. No sounds of pursuit yet. They were probably still searching his apartment, looking for the case. He needed somewhere to go, somewhere safe. His first thought was the police, but what would he tell them? That mysterious government agents were after him because he'd found evidence of illegal experiments? Without knowing who these people were, going to authorities might be walking straight into their hands. The rain grew heavier as Alex hurried through back streets, keeping to shadows, the case now hidden inside his jacket. His phone was still in his apartment along with his wallet.
He had nothing but the clothes he wore, the case,
and about $40 in loose bills from his jeans pocket. 2 blocks from his apartment, Alex spotted a familiar blue sedan parked at an intersection, the same car he'd seen outside his building the night before. The same car that had followed him home from the locksmith's, he now realized. They'd been watching him all along. Alex ducked into a convenience store as the car slowly drove past. The teenage clerk looked up briefly from his phone, then back down, uninterested. Alex pretended to browse the snack aisle while planning his next move. Frank. The old locksmith had recognized something about the case, about Project Aurora. He might know more than he'd let on. It was a risk, but Alex had few options. After buying a cheap baseball cap and sunglasses with his limited cash, a poor disguise, but better than nothing, Alex made his way back toward the locksmith's shop. The streets were busier now as evening settled in, people hurrying home from work or heading out for dinner. He kept his head down, the cap pulled low, constantly scanning for the blue sedan or the suited agents. The closed sign still hung in the locksmith's window, but lights were on in the back. Alex knocked on the door, softly at first, then more insistently when there was no response. Finally, Frank's face appeared at the window. His expression shifted from annoyance to concern when he recognized Alex. He quickly unlocked the door, ushered Alex inside, then locked it again. "They came for it, didn't they?" Frank asked, eyeing the bulge under Alex's jacket. Alex nodded, removing the case. "How did you know?" The old man sighed heavily. "Because that's not the first time I've seen one of those." He gestured toward a back room. "Come on. It's not safe to talk here." The back room was small and cluttered with locksmithing tools and equipment. Frank closed the door and pulled down a shade over its small window before turning to face Alex. 30 years ago, I wasn't just a locksmith. I worked security systems for a government contractor. Specialized locks, containment protocols. He tapped the case. "That's one of ours. Custom made for transporting sensitive materials." "What is Project Aurora?" Alex asked. "The journal mentioned human experiments, but—" "Not here," Frank cut him off. "They'll be looking for you, and this will be an obvious place to check." He moved to a filing cabinet and pulled out a faded manila envelope. "My brother has a cabin about 2 hours north, remote, off the grid. You'll be safe there for a while. He handed Alex the envelope, which contained a key and a hand-drawn map. No phones. No electronics. Nothing they can track. Who are they? Frank's face darkened. We called them the cleanup crew. They don't have an official name, at least not one I ever knew. Their job is to contain information leaks, retrieve classified materials. He glanced at the case. Eliminate security risks. Are they going to kill me? Alex asked, his mouth suddenly dry. Not if they get what they want first. Frank checked his watch. My brother's coming to pick you up in 20 minutes. Back door, you can trust him. What about you? The old man gave a thin smile. I'm just a senile old locksmith who doesn't remember helping anyone today. Been that way for years. While they waited, Alex told Frank everything, finding the plane, the contents of the case, the journal entries describing the experiments. Frank listened without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. When Alex finished, the old man was silent for a long moment. What I know is mostly rumors, he finally said. Project Aurora started sometime in the late 1980s. Biological enhancements for military applications. Super soldiers, basically, though they'd never use that term. Like the photos, Alex said. The subjects with the muscle growth. Frank nodded. That would be the early phase. From what I heard, they were trying to push human capabilities beyond normal limits. Strength, speed, endurance. But there were problems. The psychological deterioration the journal mentioned. Among other things. Frank lowered his voice, though there was no one else to hear. The rumor was they couldn't control the effects. The enhancements worked, but the subjects became unstable, violent, and then there were the side effects no one anticipated. What kind of side effects? Before Frank could answer, there was a soft knock at the back door. 3 taps, then 2. Frank visibly relaxed. That's him. The man who entered looked nothing like Frank. Younger by at least 10 years, tall and lean where Frank was short and stocky. But something in his eyes marked them as brothers, the same careful assessment, the same wary intelligence. This is him? The brother asked, nodding toward Alex. His voice was gruff but not unfriendly. This is him, Frank confirmed. Alex, this is my brother Jack. Don't tell him anything you wouldn't want the whole world to know. Man can't keep a secret to save his life, Jack snorted. Says the man who worked for the government's black budget projects. Former government, Frank corrected. Very former. He turned to Alex. Go with Jack. Stay at the cabin until I contact you. Could be a few days. And then what? Alex asked. Then we figure out what to do with what you found. Frank's expression was serious. Those files, that journal, people died to try to get that information out. We owe it to them to do the right thing with it. The back door led to a small parking lot where an old pickup truck was waiting. Alex climbed in, the case now hidden in a canvas bag Frank had provided. As Jack started the engine, Alex looked back at the old locksmith standing in the doorway. Be careful, Frank called softly. And whatever you do, don't open that canister. The drive north was tense and mostly silent. Jack took back roads, frequently checking the rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. Twice he made unexpected turns and detours, eventually satisfied they weren't being followed. Frank said you found something big, Jack said after nearly an hour of silence. Something people are willing to kill for. I think so, Alex replied, watching the town give way to countryside, then to denser forest. But I'm still trying to understand what it all means, Jack grunted. Usually means someone powerful did something they shouldn't have, and now they don't want anyone to know about it. The cabin was more remote than Alex had expected, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that wound through thick woods. It was small but solid, built from heavy logs with a stone chimney. No electricity, as Frank had warned, just propane lamps and a wood stove. Generator out back for emergencies, Jack explained as he showed Alex around. Water pump in the kitchen. Outhouse behind the woodshed. Not fancy, but nobody will find you here. Before leaving, Jack provided basic supplies, food, water, extra clothes that mostly fit, and a shotgun that Alex hoped he wouldn't need to use. Frank will be in touch, Jack said as he prepared to leave. Probably take a few days to make sure things cool down. He paused at the door. Whatever you found, was it worth all this? Alex thought about the journal, the photos, the evidence of human experimentation that someone had tried to expose decades ago. I think so, he said finally. People should know the truth. Jack nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. Woodpile's full. Keep the stove going at night, gets cold up here. And then Alex was alone, truly alone for the first time since finding the plane. The silence of the forest was absolute, broken only by the occasional call of a night bird or rustle of leaves in the wind. In the safety of isolation, Alex spread the contents of the case on the cabin's rough wooden table. The journal, the technical documents, the sealed canister that Frank had warned him not to open, and the hard drive, useless here without electricity or a computer, but potentially the most valuable piece of all. As the propane lamp cast long shadows across the cabin walls, Alex settled in to read the journal more carefully, to try to understand what had happened all those years ago, and why people were still desperate to keep it secret today. 3 days passed at the cabin, each one blending into the next as Alex immersed himself in the journal and documents. The isolation that had initially felt oppressive soon became a strange comfort. Here, surrounded by nothing but forest, he could focus entirely on understanding what he'd found and decide what to do with it. The journal painted a disturbing picture. Project Aurora had begun as a military research program aimed at creating enhanced soldiers. The early phases showed promise. Test subjects demonstrated increased strength, accelerated healing, and improved cognitive function. But as the experiments progressed, problems emerged. Subject 34 escaped containment today, one journal entry read. It took 6 security personnel to subdue him. His strength continues to increase beyond our projections, but his mental state is deteriorating rapidly. The director insists we continue the program despite my objections. Later entries described how the subjects began developing unexpected abilities, sensitivity to electromagnetic fields, unusual resistance to extreme temperatures, and in some cases, what the writer described as non-verbal communication capabilities. They're speaking to each other somehow, the journal noted. Without words, we've separated them into isolated cells, but they still seem to coordinate their actions. It's as if they've developed a hive mind of sorts. The military representatives are ecstatic about the potential applications, but they don't understand the implications. These aren't just enhanced humans anymore. They're becoming something else entirely. The final pages of the journal described a plan to transport evidence of the program's ethical violations to a journalist. The writer, who Alex now believed was indeed the pilot of the crashed plane, had collected documentation, samples, and video evidence. If I don't make the meeting tomorrow, this journal and everything with it must reach the public. The final entry read, "What we've created here cannot be controlled, and what they're planning next is unconscionable." On the 4th morning, Alex was awakened by the sound of a vehicle approaching. He grabbed the shotgun and moved to the window, tension flooding his body. Relief washed over him when he recognized Jack's pickup truck. Frank was with him, looking tired but determined. He carried a laptop and a small satellite dish. "Figured you might need this," he said, setting up the equipment on the cabin table. "Untraceable connection. Military grade. Where did you get this?" Alex asked. Frank smiled faintly. "Let's just say I kept some souvenirs from my previous career." As the satellite connection established, Frank explained what he'd learned in the past few days. "Your apartment was turned upside down. They took everything, computer, phone, camera equipment. Then they set up surveillance, waiting for you to return." He nodded toward the case. "They want what you found badly enough to break quite a few laws getting it. Did you find out who they are?" Alex asked. "Not exactly, but I reached out to some old contacts, people who remember Project Aurora." Frank's expression darkened. "What I learned isn't good." According to Frank's sources, Aurora hadn't been shut down after the ethical concerns documented in the journal. Instead, it had been moved deeper underground, its funding channeled through a maze of shell companies and black budget allocations. The program evolved, Frank explained. From creating super soldiers to something even more ambitious, human subjects with enhanced abilities that could be controlled remotely. Perfect operatives who would follow orders without question. "Mind control?" Alex asked incredulously. "Something like that. The details are sketchy, but my source says they partially succeeded. Created subjects with enhanced physical capabilities who could be influenced through specific electromagnetic frequencies." The implications were chilling. Alex thought about the journal entries describing subjects communicating without speaking, their strange sensitivity to electromagnetic fields. "But the plane crashed more than 30 years ago," Alex said. "If they've been continuing the program all this time, then whatever they've developed now goes far beyond what's in those documents." Frank finished grimly. Jack, who had been silently listening, spoke up. So what's the plan? You can't stay here forever, and they're not going to stop looking. Frank turned to the laptop. We expose everything. Put it all online where everyone can see it. Once it's public, going after Alex becomes pointless. Won't they just deny it? Alex asked. Say the documents are fake? Some will claim that, sure. But remember what's on that hard drive. Frank nodded toward the case. The journal mentioned video evidence. With the right platform, the right distribution, this becomes too big to bury. Working together, they connected the hard drive to Frank's laptop. As expected, it contained dozens of video files, clinical recordings of the experiments, testimony from researchers, and most disturbingly, footage of the test subjects themselves. In one video, a man lifted what appeared to be several hundred pounds with minimal effort. In another, a woman placed her hand on an ice block, leaving it there for minutes without showing signs of discomfort. But it was the later videos that truly shocked them. Subjects demonstrating abilities that seemed impossible, responding to commands delivered through what the researchers called the signal. This is... Alex struggled to find words. Exactly what the public needs to see, Frank said firmly. They spent hours organizing the material, preparing it for release. Frank had contacts at several major news organizations and independent journalists known for covering government overreach. The plan was to release everything simultaneously across multiple platforms, making it impossible to contain. What about the canister? Jack asked, eyeing the sealed metal container they'd left untouched. Frank shook his head. We document it, but we don't open it. From the journal descriptions, it contains samples of whatever they were using on the subjects, too dangerous to handle without proper equipment. As evening approached, they were nearly ready. Frank had established secure connections to his contacts, and the files were prepared for distribution. In just a few hours, Project Aurora would become public knowledge. That's when they heard the helicopters. The sound came faintly at first, a distant chopping that gradually grew louder. Jack moved to the window, his face grim. 2 black helicopters. No markings. About 3 miles out and heading this way. Frank's expression hardened. They must have tracked the satellite connection. We need to move now. They quickly packed the most essential evidence, the hard drive, the journal, and key documents. The sealed canister they carefully wrapped and placed in a backpack. Everything else they left behind. My truck's too obvious, Jack said. We'll take the trail through the back forest. There's an old ranger station about 5 miles east. We can get help there. As they hurried out the cabin's back door, the helicopter sounds grew louder. Flashlight beams cut through the darkening forest to the north, ground teams already closing in. The forest trail was narrow and difficult to follow in the fading light. They moved as quickly as they dared, aware that every minute brought their pursuers closer. The weight of the evidence felt both physical and symbolic, a burden Alex had carried since finding the plane, now shared with these 2 unlikely allies. Almost there, Jack whispered after what seemed like hours of tense hiking. Ranger station just beyond that ridge. That's when the trail ahead of them suddenly filled with light, powerful beams cutting through the trees, voices calling out commands. They'd been outflanked. Back, Frank hissed, pulling them off the trail and into the dense underbrush. There's another way. They crawled through thick vegetation, branches scratching at their faces, the sounds of pursuit all around them now. Frank led them to a steep ravine, almost invisible until they were right at its edge. Old mining tunnel down there, he explained. Comes out near the highway. They half climbed, half slid down the ravine's side, the beams of searching flashlights sweeping over the spot they'd vacated seconds before. The tunnel entrance was small and partially collapsed, but passable. They squeezed through one by one, the darkness inside absolute. Frank's small flashlight provided their only illumination as they made their way through the narrow passage. The air was damp and stale, the walls occasionally dripping with groundwater. Almost there, Frank whispered after 20 minutes of careful progress. Light ahead. The tunnel exit opened onto a steep embankment above the highway. Below, cars occasionally passed, unaware of the drama unfolding in the forest above. Now what? Alex asked, clutching the backpack containing their evidence. Frank pulled out the satellite phone he'd brought with him. Now we finish what we started. While Jack kept watch, Frank made a series of calls, activating the release protocol they'd set up earlier. Within minutes, the contents of the hard drive began uploading to servers around the world. the journal scans and document photos following shortly after. "It's done," Frank said finally, a mixture of relief and apprehension in his voice. "By morning, Project Aurora will be everywhere. Too many sources, too many copies to contain." They flagged down a passing truck, the driver suspicious but willing to give them a ride to the nearest town. As they climbed in, Alex looked back toward the forest one last time. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now it's out of our hands," Frank replied. "The truth will do what it always does, cause chaos at first, then clarity. People will demand answers." By the time they reached the small roadside diner in the next town, their phones were buzzing with notifications, news alerts, social media explosions. The first pieces of their evidence were already spreading across the internet, picked up by major outlets and independent journalists alike. On the diner's small television, a news anchor was speaking urgently about shocking allegations of illegal government experimentation and whistleblower evidence from a decades-old program. "It worked," Alex whispered. Watching as photos from the journal appeared on the screen, Frank nodded slowly. Phase 1 worked. Now comes the hard part, making sure the right people are held accountable. As they sat in that small-town diner, watching the world react to what they'd released, Alex thought about the plane in the forest. A failed mission 30 years ago, finally completed today. The pilot, Dr. L, had died trying to expose the truth, but his evidence had survived, waiting in that metal case for someone to find it. "Was it worth it?" Jack asked, echoing the question he'd posed days earlier at the cabin. Alex watched the television as more details emerged, as people began asking questions that would have remained buried forever, if not for a wrong turn on a hiking trail and a glint of metal in the forest. "Yes," he said quietly, "it was worth it."